All right. So we have, as I said, we have a lot to get to today. Our agenda, the first thing we're going to do is take a look at the draft review process that we've been working on developing. I'm going to go over the goals and kind of how we have oriented ourselves to that process. I'm going to take you through the process in as much detail as possible and talk about next steps and your opportunity to provide feedback on that process. After that, and I think that will probably take up about half of our time. And I'm anticipating questions and conversation about that. Following that, would love to just have a brief conversation about provider supply analysis reports, your initial reactions and questions to those, and see if there are questions that you all have that we can get back to TRI. And then we're going to have a discussion about family engagement, some of the work that's happening in the field, some of the work that we are interested on our end, and then we're going to wrap up. Dana has a contract update for you hot off the presses, which I know you're all anxious to hear. So we put that last to make sure that y'all stay on the call and hang out with us the whole time. All right, so let's jump into the phase one deliverable review process and rubric. So this is how the phase one plans that you all submit in mid-December are going to be evaluated. And before we get into what that looks like, I just want to kind of take a higher level look at it and talk about what our goals with this process are. And first, we are working to create a process that is fair, transparent, defensible, that everybody understands how we get from point A to point B, and that there's no nothing behind the curtain here. Everybody's going to know where we're coming from as we go into it. Next, we want to ensure that the review process tracks with the phase one toolkit so that what you see in the toolkit is reflective of how we will be evaluating and assessing the deliverables and plans that you submit. Third, kind of goes without saying, but I say it anyways. We want to make sure we're holding high expectations for all involved. That is hubs, that is regional stewardship committee members, that is those of us on the early learning division side. This should obviously reflect high quality work. And then finally, from my perspective, this is really about starting 2020 in a real position of strength throughout the state, every region of the state, so that we have 16 phase one plans that can both inform the upcoming RFA processes and lay the foundation for the next steps in ECE sector planning, as we've talked about many times. So that's really where we're coming from on this. And what we're going to do next is jump into the draft. We're going to jump into the draft of the document that we're working on and walk you through it. And then after the webinar, we'll send this out to you all so that you all have a chance to dig into it in more detail and provide some feedback on it over the next couple days. So, start from the top. So I'm just going to walk through this. Please do use the chat box if you have questions, or feel free to jump in with questions as well over the phone. So first and foremost, each hub's phase one deliverables is going to be reviewed by a team here at the ELD that's going to consist of folks on the community systems team, the program team, and our policy team. And the role of that team will be to review and assess each hub's phase one deliverables using a rubric that we're going to look at in just a minute, and then make recommendations to the early learning system director, Miriam, as to whether each deliverable has been completed successfully or whether it needs some additional work. So I think that's the first important distinction here, is that sorry, I'm seeing some things in the chat box. The first important distinction here is that the review team is a team that will be making recommendations. One of the ways that we're setting up the process.
Hey, Brett, this is Margie.
Hi, Margie.
Brett, I can watch the chat box for you.
Thank you.
I'll watch the chat box for you.
Great, thank you. Appreciate that. one of the ways that we're trying to set this process up is to make sure that we're getting multiple people's perspectives on each hub's deliverables, so that it's not just a single person responding to an individual hub. So each hub's deliverables will be reviewed and scored by 3 members of the review team, and the review team will use a framework for scoring each deliverable that we'll dig into in a minute, of exceeds expectations, meets expectations, and additional information required. What's important to understand about these scores is that the intention is not for these scores to be shared publicly or for them to be final or binding. It's really just a way to give our review team a starting point for discussion and nailing down a recommendation that will be made ultimately to Miriam. And so they're really not anything that's going to be set in stone or anything like that, or really have any external value whatsoever. Just something for us to work from. And beyond that, all members of the review team will be expected to review, but not necessarily score, each hub's set of deliverables, so that we can have a really robust discussion about it. And so, as I said, we're getting as many perspectives as possible. We will be striving to make these decisions in terms of recommendations to leadership via consensus wherever possible, but also recognizing that consensus may not always be possible to achieve. But that's what we're really going to be shooting for here. So as kind of implied in this process, it's possible that the team and or Miriam and whoever else she involves in her process of reviewing these may recommend or require that some hubs revise and resubmit more than one of their phase 1 deliverables. So we've been talking about the importance of sharing draft deliverables with us, and Denise and I and Anne have had a chance to review some of those and have some conversations with a handful of hubs so far. And part of that is, that helps us inform our thinking, and part of it is if there are revisions to be made, we'd much rather go through that process on the front end than the back end of this. And I'll talk a little bit more about timeline in a few minutes. So if we have a situation where there's only minor revisions or if clarifications are needed, hub staff will be given guidance on what that looks like, what's required. And if there are more significant requirements or revisions needed, it's possible, potentially even likely, that some hubs may need to reconvene their regional stewardship committee to do some additional work on this. So again, being out in front of this is certainly preferable. Our review team is going to be co-chaired by Gwen and Joan. Anne and I will be on point as the process facilitators, and Aaron is going to be on point for administrative and logistical support. This is what our review team looks like. So again, cross-section of program team, community systems team, and policy team, and some key dates here for you. So as you can see right now, we are at the very top of this table sharing this with you. We're going to give you a couple days for feedback following this meeting, and then we're going to look to have this review process finalized by the end of this week. And then, as you can see, obviously December 13th is the big date for submission. We have a very quick turnaround in terms of when we're going to be getting this review team together into a room and doing this work. And basically our goal is to have these all reviewed with recommendations to Miriam and determinations communicated back out to you within 1 week. We know that with the holidays, kind of right on the back end of this, it's a challenging time of year. So we want to make sure we're getting that communication out to you. Now at the bottom here, this is to Jen's question that she just popped in the chat box. Minor revisions or clarifications we're going to be looking to have resubmitted kind of right on the back end of the new year. And hubs that have a little bit more work to do are going to have a little bit of a longer timeline there. But with the RFAs coming out in late January, we really don't have a whole lot of time to work with, obviously. I don't know the exact or if exact dates on the RFAs have been finalized yet. If they get pushed back at all, we may have a little bit of wiggle room on these dates. So I don't want to say that these are completely set in stone, but I would not anticipate having a whole lot of time to work with here. Um, so the next thing I want to do is dig into the draft rubric that we're working on, and we've actually gone through multiple iterations of this at this point, and just kind of give you a sense of how we are framing this. So as I said, one of the things that we wanted to do is ensure that this tracks with the toolkit. Um, and so we've set it up just to go through the deliverables and using that framework that I've said. So one of the things here that is just kind of the reality of this type of process is that these are the ways in which that we are going to be evaluating these plans are inherently qualitative, and that's one of the reasons why we're having multiple people reviewing each plan and why we're having a group process, because when something is qualitative, we don't want to leave it in the hands of just one person, but we do want to be able to have some discussion about that. So just walking through here, well, actually what I'm going to do is I'm going to just give you all a chance to just read what we have here. So as you can see in this section where we're talking about the priority populations in deliverable 1, this section that says exceeds expectations, I mean, this is really reflective of really a very high standard and high quality of work. One of the things that we've thought about with work that exceeds expectations is it wouldn't require any revisions or clarifications. And multiple pieces of evidence kind of at every turn, high level of clarity, etc. Real evidence of use of an equity lens, all of those types of things. Do we?
Yes, we can send out the schedule.
Yeah. I got it. And so if we move down into the meets expectations section, all of these statements are the same statements with different levels of completeness, thoroughness, accuracy, etc. So, so up top where we've said, multiple pieces of supporting evidence or demonstrates a thorough and complete understanding. In the meets expectations section, we've said some evidence and demonstrates a satisfactory understanding. So again, this is, as I've said, inherently qualitative. What's the difference between thorough and complete versus satisfactory? That's why we have multiple people looking at this and talking it through, and why we're going through this process of providing those of you that submit deliverables to us in advance with some feedback. And then in the meets expectations category, we've also included this final bullet where it says may require minor revisions or clarifications, and that's something that we've really gone back and forth on, and I think would love to hear your thoughts and perspective on through the feedback process. Is does something that meets expectations not require any minor feedback or sorry, minor revisions or clarifications? I mean, in my mind, I think it's totally reasonable that there could be work that's very well done on this that might have, some things that, we still see clarity on. And those two things aren't necessarily mutually exclusive, but I realize there may be different perspectives on that. And then in the additional information required section, this is, minimal or no evidence, doesn't demonstrate a clear understanding of use of an equity lens, lacks evidence. This is just, if there were pieces of the grid that were not filled out, were missing, were inaccurate, etc. And this would signify, requiring significant revisions. So moving down into deliverable 2, for family needs and preferences, this piece is really pretty straightforward. But again, we've tried to use the same types of language formulations throughout this in terms of being clear and thorough and accurate, and meeting expectations, being a satisfactory completion of the work, and additional information required, as its name implies, means we need more. One of the things that's important here, I think, to note is that, really what we're striving for and what we hope to see is that everybody is coming through on every deliverable at the meets expectations level or above. I mean, that's probably goes without saying. Um, but from a practical standpoint, there's not a lot of difference between exceeds expectations and meets expectations. We want to just be able to recognize where work has been done really to the highest quality. Deliverable 2, provider supply analysis. Again, this just kind of goes through the pieces of the toolkit, and looks at how clear and thorough was the description of each of these pieces that we're asking for in the toolkit. Meets expectations. Again, we're using the term adequately, and additional information required does not adequately. So, and again, you'll have some time to look at this on your own. And then this one I actually want to talk about for just a minute. On deliverable 3, I've had some interesting conversations with folks about deliverable 3 throughout this process. So what we're looking for here is, really this description of the upcoming opportunities, including a range of settings, potential children that could be served, innovative approaches, to financing, facilities, staffing, things of that nature. One of the things that has come up that multiple people have raised for me in conversation in the last couple of weeks around deliverable 3 is this idea that that if hubs are really transparent about what's happening in their region and the investments that are being made in their region, that could actually cost them slots in an RFA process, and that the rationale may be, well, this region is already investing so heavily that the state doesn't need to invest there, and that's really not, I think, reflective of where any of us would be coming from. And I think what we're really trying to get to is how can we leverage the existing opportunities. The other thing that's really important to think about here with deliverable 3 is this is really one of the places where we need to have this both and thinking around. We have this RFA that's right on the horizon, and we have a much longer and more thorough planning process ahead of us, both in terms of what's coming up soon and thinking about the long haul. And so our hope, as we've said, is that this plan can not only be something that supports the RFA processes that are coming up around the corner, but also something that can be useful to you all in the work that you're doing in your communities. So, one of the things that I really think is important with deliverable 3 is this piece around, demonstrates that outreach was conducted to Head Start, K-12, childcare, et cetera. And that doesn't necessarily mean that you need to do a separate round of outreach or a separate round of engagement to these stakeholders. It may be that they're present and actively involved in your regional stewardship committee. It may be that you have been working with them in a variety of capacities. But the idea here, I think, is that this is deliverable 3 should say something about the providers and the entities that are well positioned in your region to actually be offering ECE services. So for me, one of the things that I would look for, as I'm reviewing these plans is if it's just focused on the systems level work, for example, Hub has a really strong relationship with CCR&R. That's great, and we certainly want that to be in place. But that doesn't tell us probably as much as we need to know about emerging opportunities for ECE expansion. So it would need to go deeper than that. It would need to get down to this actual provider type level. So what we hope is that this rubric can, be helpful for you as you think about, what you want to include in that section of of your deliverables. And I think that takes us to the end. I know there have been questions blown by in the chat box that I haven't addressed. So this feels like a good spot to stop and see what has come up for people.
I think the first one I was seeing was if we could email them this version.
Thank you.
Just the scroll so they can
And if you
review.
email, I can send it out to me. I can do it if you want.
Okay, what else while I'm doing this?
That was the big question. A lot of people are on vacation and they're shutting down their hub offices around the 20th to January 2nd. So kind of asking about, it says that 12/20 is the last working day for Lynn Ben Lincoln. So maybe a little bit about the timeline.
Yeah, hang on. I'll get to that one in a second.
Okay.
I know. Yep, I hear you. Yeah, I don't know what to say about the issue of offices being closed. I mean, I feel like that's something that we probably need to have a conversation with Joan about, to be totally honest.
Yeah, I mean, I would say, you know, as we've been saying before, you know, if you're able to get some draft things to us, I think, you know, our goal is that we are having few of those requiring major revisions and, you know, even maybe fewer with minor revisions. So to the extent that that's possible, if you haven't reached out or set up a time to just talk through what you've got so far, we can at least try to front load some of that work and try to avoid conflicts with the holidays, and then probably have a conversation about what that looks like for anybody who's closed during that time.
Could you scroll to that timeline?
Sure. So here's our timeline.
So what it's looking like, if I'm reading this correctly, is that the comments that came in around the closure between December 20th and then when there would be the resubmittal requirement on the 3rd. And so that sounds like there's individually the hubs would need to check in on that. Is that okay? I just wanted to clarify that was.
Yeah, and as I said, we may have a little bit of wiggle room on the back end on these dates. I don't want to overpromise on that. And when we put this draft together, we've tried to be conservative, you know, assuming that there really wouldn't be a whole lot of time between when we need revisions back and when the RFAs will go out. But we may have a little bit more time than this. So I see Bess's question, regional differences in the plans. How do those differences potentially shape or inform the RFA? So my understanding, and others in the room, feel free to chime in if I don't have this right, but my understanding is that each hub's phase 1 plan will essentially be an addendum to an RFA that will be consistent across the state. And so for somebody applying from Lane, they would see the state RFA and then the Lane phase 1 sector plan. Do I have that right?
Yes, so they would be able to access their regional plan.
Okay, great. Bess, does that answer your question?
It does, thank you.
Other thoughts, questions?
Hey Brett, this is Krista, and I just have to apologize because there was a little bit of a mix-up in the very beginning of this in terms of which number to call in.
Yep.
So I missed the warm-up to this whole thing, so I'm coming in a little bit cold on it. Would you be willing to kind of like hit the high-level goals? The last question and answer kind of helped me with that, but it can you kind of just say again, like the purpose of really like this review process is not trying to make our lives crazy, even though we're a little bit crazy already, but it sounds like you're really trying to make sure that hubs have a voice in the RFA process. Am I understanding that accurately, or could you kind of hit that again?
Yeah. So each hub's phase one deliverables will be used as an addendum or appendix to the RFAs. So somebody who's applying from one of the 5 counties that your hub serves would have access to your phase one plan as part of their application process. The idea being that the information in that plan should, in theory, tell providers in your region something about who they should be prioritizing and communities they should be serving and things of that nature, right? So the review process is really designed to, I mean, I think the plainest way to put it is to say, has your phase one plan been approved or not by the Early Learning Division? Go ahead, Gwen.
I could add to that too, and I think for me, one of the goals in kind of going through this review process is that since they will be available for all applicants, that we want to really make sure that every applicant has, like, in each community has like access to a really high quality sector planning, right? And so we want to, there's sort of a little bit of that. I'm assuming all will be of high quality, but sort of like that the information that is in each of the sector planning is consistent in that every applicant has access to similar information regardless of the community in which they reside or in which they do business. So I think that that's it, is what also is that we really want to make sure sort of that equity of availability to quality information as they're filling out their RFA. And then we don't know all the questions yet. We're working on and developing the RFA, but there will be, we will be asking the applicants to demonstrate sort of, how they will either, how they are in alignment or how their services or their plan for services, align with all of the work and what you've put in your sector planning and analysis. So I think that there's a connection there. So the quality of the sector planning really will help, I think, the quality of the RFA applications.
That's really helpful. Thank you so much for clearing that up. At least it gives me a stronger sense of that, and that's really good. Do you, in this process, at least I can say for our hub, we've also included a step where we're asking our governance board to approve the deliverables. Like, to me, that's, for lack of a better word, kind of like our internal process of like, I'm doing, this is a subcommittee of the governance board, and then we bring it to the governance board. So in thinking about this, do you all, I would just look for guidance from you about the review documents that you're sharing with us. Obviously, we probably should be sharing this document with our board so they're aware of this process as well. I'd just be curious to have your insights about how we would involve our boards in this whole thing, like what their function is.
My opinion on this is that the original conception of the regional stewardship committees was that they were designed to be charged by hub governance councils to be the owners of this work. And so I realize that for a host of reasons, many of you need to bring the work that's done by your stewardship committee back to your governance council. But to the extent that the stewardship committee can be delegated the authority to move this work forward without having that extra layer in there, I think it facilitates being able to move quickly. We have a couple questions that have come up specifically about the RFA process that I don't know that we can answer, but I'll just put them out there so that we're at least recognizing that the questions have come in. Are there guidelines or restrictions on hub involvement in an RFA submission by partners? These may both be questions that have to go through our FAQ process. And then Lisa said, in addition to Brenda's question, when will the term aggregator be defined and clarified? Who can apply as aggregators?
So I think that probably to the first question for Brenda is, I think what we're doing, like our process is that we're capturing all questions and then vetting the responses so that they have sort of a larger audience of review, so that we get them as accurate as possible on our first try. So I think that, I'm sorry, Brenda, but we will capture that question and then add it to our FAQ. And then Lisa, in response to your question, because believe me, last time we met, I made a commitment that you would have information around the aggregator on the 15th, and I know that was on Friday, and we have a final second or a third, I don't know what, the FAQ is about ready to be posted with more information around the fiscal agent role. And I'm looking to some of my colleagues, was it going to be, I'll get that for you on Friday. It'll be this Friday is when we're planning on posting the updated FAQ.
The next question is about a readiness self-assessment for providers in preparation for deciding whether or not to fill out an application. Is that still in the mix? If so, is there an ETA for that? I don't know anything about this.
Sorry, just reading through it. My response, okay. I was looking to see if anybody was going to throw me a lifeline, you know. So, yes, I do think that is still in our mind is something that'll be beneficial. What we don't want to have are providers who spend a lot of time filling out an application that, really they're not eligible for, or for whatever reason they don't qualify. And so, yes, we are looking at having sort of a, I'm just trying to look at the term, like a pre-RFA. I think it'll be more of a sort of a self-assessment as to whether you would qualify and whether you would be interested in being a publicly funded provider. So I think that's where really what we're looking at, sort of like more of a self-assessment around their own capacity, and then also a self-assessment of their qualifications or eligibility to apply.
Great, thank you. Do we have any other questions about the Phase 1 deliverable review process? Okay. So if there are no more questions, I'll talk a little bit about next steps. So as our timeline indicated, our plan was to send the doc out to you after the webinar. We've already done that, so you have it. We need feedback from you within the next couple days so that we can finish it up by the end of this week. And for those of you that have not yet done so, strongly encourage you to submit draft deliverables for feedback. If you want feedback on deliverable 1, we're asking that you get that to us by the end of this week. And the other thing, kind of as I've already mentioned, is just encouragement to keep short and long-term goals in mind, particularly in regards to deliverable 3. Next steps on our end are to incorporate your feedback and finalize the review process and rubric by the end of this week, and provide feedback on draft deliverables that you send our way, and provide TA support as needed. For any of you that do send us draft deliverables, number 1 particularly, but if you have others, we're happy to look at them by the end of this week. We can get those back to you, get you some feedback before the Thanksgiving holiday. And that's something that Denise and I and Ann as well have really prioritized trying to make time for, because we think those conversations are really important.
Hey, Brad.
Yep.
This is Lisa. And regarding the plans that you have seen thus far, do you have any just sort of general comments that might be helpful to the rest of us?
Yeah, good question. I know we talked about this a couple weeks ago, but I think I would just reiterate that the more specific you're able to be about who you're trying to serve and where within your hub region you're trying to serve them, the better. I think that the more specific that you could be about the needs and preferences of each of the priority populations that you identify, the better. Yeah, Anne, what would you add? Because I know we've been on a couple calls on this recently.
Yeah, the other thing I echo both of those that Brett just said. I think I would also add that you know, using in the decision making grid the sort of discussion about the quantitative data section to identify where you know would like to see more data, you know, or that you're not able to get to a perfect number. I think we fully expect that, you know, the data that you have available to you aren't going to get exactly what you'd love to have in a perfect world, but that, you know, using what you have, what that's been able to show you and how that's directed you. So I would say get close where you can on a quantitative level, but if you feel like you're hitting a breaking point with that, or you're just not able to go any farther, I think using that discussion area to talk about, you know, what would have been helpful, or how using what you had really guided what your family engagement ends up, you know, looking like. I think that's, you know, our estimates, that's kind of what we're hoping for in terms of that. So if anyone is feeling particularly hung up on quantitative things, I would say, you know, let's talk, let us know, but also know that we fully expect there to be some robust discussion sections where estimates aren't available to the level of detail that, you know, you might like.
This is Krista. I have a question when it's good.
It's good. Go for it.
Go ahead. Okay. So it sounds to me like, just in looking at this review process, originally I was thinking, oh, I can just submit, you know, like my deliverables and you all can look at those. But it also sounds like you're needing to have like some evidentiary stuff. Like do you, I mean, I'm just thoughtful about like, is the document that you're sending us, are we going to have some guidance about what things to give you outside of the actual deliverables, so that, like, because it might save you all and us time if we can substantiate whatever it is that we're sending to you, you know, given a process. So I don't know, maybe any guidance you can provide on that would be really helpful.
Yeah, that's a good thought, good question. I don't think I have an immediate response to it, but I appreciate you raising it, and maybe something that just so that it doesn't get lost in the cobwebs of my own brain. If you could include that in some written feedback that you send to us over the next couple of days, that would be really helpful.
Sure thing. Happy to do it.
Thanks.
Hey, Brett, just one quick question. I was just looking through deliverable 1, the priority population.
Mm-hmm.
Third bullet down, states clearly articulate 2 or more priority populations
Mm-hmm.
from historically underserved. Are we still bound by the 4 overall?
Yeah, I think we want to stay in that range. I think that's what we're shooting for.
More than 2, but
So 2
or less?
yeah.
I mean, what about, 5? Or is it absolutely no more than 4?
Yeah, I think this is where looking at draft deliverables is really helpful, to be totally honest, Lisa, because, you know, I don't want to paint myself into a corner here and say absolutely no more than 4. There may be a very good reason why there may be a 5th, and there may be, you know, some levels of intersection and overlap, and however we want to describe it, that come into play. And so yeah, I mean, I think we want to be mindful that once we start making laundry lists, then we're no longer talking about priorities. We're describing who lives in a given region. But yeah, I don't know that one is written in stone, but I think that's kind of the area that we want to be living in.
This is Beth. I was just curious, when you're saying you want to see the data down to the most specific area or, possible in the region, are you thinking down to the school district level or city, zip code, neighborhood? Like, is it just up to us to kind of get this small of a region as we can, or do you have a recommendation on that?
Yeah, I think it could be any of those. I think what we're trying to avoid is, things that are so broad that they're hard to pin down, like at the county level, for example, gets a little bit tricky. If there's a descriptive region of your service area, like just for example, like you might identify South Lane County as a priority geographic area, and if you want to do that, I think that's fine. I think what we would need to know and see is, like, if you were thinking about it from a standpoint of somebody that doesn't know the geography of Lane County, how would you describe South Lane County? Like, what communities are in South Lane County? If you want to use zip codes, if you want to use names of communities, if you want to use school districts, I mean, I think all of that is fine. It's something that gets, a little bit more specific than just, a county or a broad region or something along those lines.
Okay, that's helpful, thanks.
Okay, let's keep moving. I think next up on our list or on our agenda is the provider supply analysis reports that you all received, and we don't have to spend too much time on this, but would love to hear your thoughts, folks' initial thoughts. If and how you've been able to use the report so far, and if you have questions that you'd like us to pass along to TRI, because frankly we probably can't answer them, and if you do, please use the chat log so that we have a record of them. I know that some of you had mentioned that you couldn't access the YouTube tutorial that Sherry Friedman put together for us. That has been fixed, so that link is active and live now. You should be able to get in there, no problem. So with that, I'll just open it up to whatever anybody has to say or ask. Has anybody been able to use it so far? I know it's only been a few days.
This is Kelly. I've watched the tutorial. Actually, we watched it a couple of times. It's good.
Great. Thanks, Kelly.
So the problem that I was, and I haven't gone into it deeply, but the challenge that we've had is that the PDG data and the NACWARE data don't seem to be the same. So we haven't lined it up. That's what we're going to do next. Mm-hmm. But it kind of took us off in a different direction that is a little concerning. So how do we resolve that when the PDG and the NACWARE are different?
Yeah, I would say when you're talking about your provider supply, the PDG data are a point in time. So what was available from licensing, prior to September 30th when you receive the data. NACWARE is going to be updated, as I understand, pretty regularly. So I would definitely expect to see some differences. I think in trying to tell the story about your provider profile and what's available to families based on their needs, I would use the NACWARE to kind of use those filters and to get sort of the more up-to-date version of that.
Perfect. Thank you very much.
This is Margie. The other thing about NACWARE is it is voluntary, and we have the majority of our providers enrolled in NACWARE. However, if PDG was coming from the licensing list, what will be missing in the PDG are the license exempt and recorded programs that are enrolled in NACWARE. So you'll be able to capture those in the NACWARE, the reports that Sherry sent, where where the PDG may not have that information.
There was an additional question from South Coast that was a little bit slightly different in that it didn't include Reedsport. So I don't know if there's a way to reconcile that.
Mm.
I believe so.
Yeah, I saw that. I think that might be a good thing to ask Sherry about as to why Reedsport was left off. I'm not clear. I know I've looked in NACRAWare for Reedsport and have found providers in there, so
Okay.
that's a question I think we need to take to Sherry and may need to update South Coast.
Okay.
Hey guys, this is Lisa, and we're still kind of pouring through the TRI data overall, and I think we will have some more specific questions. But one that has come up here in the room today is TRI able to pull the total duration of hours that a program offers services? There's portions of the day, but it doesn't necessarily say that the total duration that they're open or provide service.
I know, this is Margie again, I know in the data points, and I'd have to pull it up to look at it, I do believe it's broken out like that, and so I don't know if there's an element that shows the total. Sherry may have a magic way to get to that, so I think that would be another question we want to ask her, but I'm not sure the fields actually show that particular data element.
Okay. And then I just also want to echo what I think I heard a colleague say, that, you know, we're sort of, you know, still figuring out how this fits with the PDG data, and there seems to be some pretty wide variances. And also just a recognition that with the changes in the updates to NACRAWare, moving from 211 back to the CCR&R, there may be a little bit of a lag. I know in talking with our CCR&R director, there was just some concerns and some of the information there, just because of that lag and the timing of everything. So I'm just putting that on note.
Okay. All right. Well, for those of you that haven't had a chance to dig in on this yet, once you get into it, if you have questions, please just email them to us. There may be some that Margie can answer, but most likely we'll need to shoot those over to Sherry to get a response. But she's been working really hard to try to get you guys useful information and has been really responsive when I've emailed her. So hopefully we could turn those questions around to you pretty quickly. All right, let's talk family engagement. So we're gonna have a bit of a share out here for you guys, but before we get there, we do have a request from Melanie, our communications director, and I know most of you at this point have wrapped up or are wrapping up your family engagement work as part of your phase 1. But for any of you that have remaining family engagement events activities, Melanie is looking to participate in those, or I shouldn't say participate, join, attend, and document, really, to, you know, hear people's stories, take pictures, and hear directly from families around the state about what's going on in this work. And it is really about storytelling, and kind of telling the story outside of our you know, early childhood bubble, but, you know, talking to policymakers and media and people that have a chance to influence, you know, public opinion and public will around this issue. So if that's something that you still have on the table and feel like it would make sense to reach out to Melanie, let us know. And if you're all set, if that's all finished up, but you have things like pictures or documents or stories from families or narratives from families that you're able to share, that's also great. So just a call out there. I see some folks are getting in on the chat box there, so thank you for that. And then the next thing that we wanted to do was just a little bit of a share out about the family engagement work that has taken place. So share some success stories, some lessons learned, and really with a frame of mind, because we know you're kind of wrapping that up for phase one, with a frame of mind towards looking ahead to what comes next and how we continue to engage families throughout this BCA sector planning process. So we've reached out to a few folks and asked them to share, and we'll invite others to share as well. But why don't we go ahead and start with Christy from Lynn Benton Lincoln.
Okay, well, one of the things that we wanted to do in thinking about our family engagement efforts was to put together a resource that our partners could help us with this. So we were collecting similar data from as many places as possible. So we did this in a form of a survey and modeled it after a little after the household survey from the Strengths and Needs Assessment group, and did it through SurveyMonkey. We've had it open for just a few days beyond a month, and so far we have received 240 responses, some in English, some in Spanish. So we had the survey available in both languages. Those are the primary languages in our region. As we did this, we built in some qualifiers to make sure that we were targeting the survey to the families that we had identified as our potential priority populations and families that were in our region. And so we have noticed that we have had quite a few that were disqualified from completion of the survey because they either were not identified as a potential priority population, or they didn't have a child under the 8 years of age, or they didn't live in one of our 3 counties. So that was something that we did early on just to make sure. We wanted as much data as possible, but we wanted to make sure we were getting the data for the right families to move this work forward. As we did this, our largest response has been with the birth to 2 population. Almost 100 of those 240 responses were for families with birth to 2-year-olds. As we set it up, what we did was, if the family, they could do it anonymously, or if they'd like to provide their contact information, they would be included in a raffle for a fall food basket. So essentially everything you will need for a Thanksgiving dinner.
Oh, wow.
We're calling it a fall food basket because everyone celebrates their holidays differently.
Sure.
And we did this one for each county at our meeting, our stewardship committee meeting last Friday. We had county representatives draw names, and we've had some just wonderful responses and excitement as we've shared with them that they were the winners, and we'll be receiving those by this Friday. And we had already planned to take pictures of delivering the baskets, so we can pass those pictures along. We did add an additional question. Would you be willing to participate in a follow-up phone interview so that our parent engagement coordinator can call and get more information from families, especially where we may have had limited responses for a particular population, or wanted to dig a little deeper. So that is what we're working on now. We've also had partners have shared the survey link on their Facebooks. Early Intervention, Early Childhood Special Education had the home visitors take the surveys out on visits and complete them with parents. Many of our partners have had the survey during their own hosted parent meetings so that families can fill out the paper, and then they're sending them in to us so that we can include all of that data on for analysis. And then our parent engagement coordinator is doing a few more targeted locations with culturally specific organizations with some follow-up questions. One thing that we noticed with our Latinx population is we love what we have, everything's great, everything's perfect. And it just didn't feel like a survey was the right space to gain that information. So felt we wanted to do some FaceTime for sharing of information. And then as far as next steps or really looking ahead, long-term plans, I've been working with Oregon State University. There is a community organizing class that I did a presentation for at the beginning of the term, and the students all do a team project, and these are OSU grad students in the School of Public Health, and one of their team projects, so I gave 2 projects that students could work on, and one of the team projects is developing an ongoing survey for us around child care needs and preferences that will be a broader data collection. So what we did this time was very targeted, and this is something we hope to have the survey available on our own website, on our Polywog website. Our partners have it, so that we're doing continuous data collection on this for the next potential rounds and where we would go. So we have it all ready and available.
That's great.
That's awesome.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. Let's jump over to Mary and Polk. Lisa, do you want to talk about what you guys have been doing?
Sure. Likewise, we have had a pretty robust family engagement activities going on. We are winding down our focus groups. We've had 11 focus groups so far. We've done them geographically. We've also then targeted some specific populations, and those have been a really good time to really connect with the community. We also have an online survey that we have been getting out into the community and through a variety of different ways. And then also have had some stakeholder outreach by connecting in both natural touch points as well as bringing different groups together. So those 3 general areas have been sort of our outreach focus areas. With our focus groups, we've had those both in English and in Spanish. We've had neutral facilitators come in and facilitate those for us. We have been offering dinner and childcare and then incentives for families to participate in those. I would say those have been very successful. We have had a couple that have been a little bit disappointing in terms of numbers, but generally speaking, we'll get anywhere from 8 to 15. We've had as high as 25 people in a couple of our Spanish ones, so the attendance does vary.
Sure.
I think our lessons learned there is it really matters who is inviting people to those focus groups. We've had a really big social media campaign. We've also been handing out flyers through all of our partners and making the information known. We also did some PR through local papers. One of our papers picked that up and published it, but it really matters when somebody is calling families and inviting them to go, having that trusted relationship. So in the future, when we do focus groups, I think that's really going to definitely be a big, an even stronger part of how we recruit families to attend. In regards to our online survey, we've had about, so far we've got about 350 responses. So we're pretty excited about that. We offered it in English, Spanish, and Russian, and again have been promoting that very heavily through social media, also through our partners. We've got flyers that have been built, and we've printed flyers off for people to hand out. I think one thing we figured out pretty quickly is just emailing it out to partners doesn't necessarily work. It's really, sometimes you just have to
print them and hand them to them so that they can get that out to families. We've also realized that flyers, I think we've been all trying to do this at a very rapid pace. And the flyers haven't always, I think, connected with parents. We've gotten some feedback on that just in terms of some of the language. The term focus group, for example, doesn't always really resonate, and people don't always know what that really means. So there's some learning that we certainly had with some of the language and how we promote that information. One thing that has come up, particularly in our focus groups, but even in something we've tried to guard against in our survey, is the whole notion of public charge, and for some populations not feeling comfortable or confident to either come to something or answer questions. So really just doing all that we can to guarantee anonymity, as well as just put to rest some of those public charge questions. And so we've actually done some work with a group here that works with migrant populations, mano a mano, and gotten some really good language on that as we've been reaching out to those communities that may have some challenges in that arena. Also, as it relates to the survey and building the survey, and hopefully we've put enough safeguards into it, but just making sure that we can cross-tab that all of the information from the survey back into where we need it for the deliverables to hand in on the 13th. And rather than trying to really manipulate things in a way that may not be as productive. And also, speaking of data, one thing with our data subcommittee as part of our regional stewardship committee, and even here internally, we really tried to blind the data, both by using zip codes and then totally blinding the data in some exercises, just to really remove some of that impartiality as we're looking at removing partiality. Sorry, we're not removing impartiality. We're trying to create impartiality, but just so that we can make sure that we're looking at the data for what the data is. So those are some of the things that we've been working on.
Yeah, cool. Thank you for sharing. That's definitely some good lessons learned. I think we heard both from you and from Christy. So the last person that we had asked in advance to share was Adam and Begonia from Washington County. So if you guys could please take a few minutes and share your thoughts. And then after that, if others want to jump in and share some things that you've been learning and having some success with, that's great too.
Yes, hi. I'm going to open it up and then hand it over to Begonia, who's been leading our engagement work. I think we're taking a multi-level approach. So it was important to us that we had parents involved in the design of the engagement work. So what we did is we separated out the engagement. We created an engagement ad hoc and the data analysis ad hoc, and then kind of divided and conquered. And that's where Begonia helped co-lead that whole body of work. And so I'm going to hand over to her, but then I'm going to follow up at the end with some of the lessons that I've learned as well.
Great.
Hi, thank you, Adam. So this is Begonia. So also one of the things that I want to add in terms of like parent engagement at the governance level is that they have also equal participation on the stewardship. And I think that we're going to have an issue on Wednesday, tomorrow when we have the meeting, because we are expecting like 45 people or something like that, or 50 people, so it seems like a large number that we have to manage. And I just want to add something about the family engagement work that we did, just because as you guys, I don't have to tell you how tight this timeline is. So we decided to partner with the Coalition of Communities of Color because for two main reasons. So number one, because they have the experience of working in Washington County, so they are not strangers to the dynamics of our county. And the second one is because they already have existing relationships with culturally specific agencies here, as well as some grassroots organizations. So it makes the work like quite easier. And so what they did is the coalition actually partnered with a few culturally specific organizations and community-based research assistants. So they use specific and culturally and linguistically responsive outreach strategies. So the first thing that they did was to develop the survey in multiple languages. So it came to us in the English, Spanish, Portuguese, Vietnamese, Russian, and simplified Chinese. And then that was on paper, and we also have the link in both English and Spanish. So what the coalition did was to have like different focus groups and surveys in multiple locations in those languages, and they also provided childcare, stipend, and food to support this effort. And so we also have like 2 tiers more. So one was to like the rest of you share the links with partners from our government, the school promise providers, and others. And the third one was we actually hired a community like interviewer, so that this person was targeting the places that the coalition was not targeting, like the WIC program, DHS, like parent engagement night, parenting classes, local churches. And then we also have like a face-to-face time with childcare providers and one of the unions that represent them. So what we learned is this is a lot of work. We actually got 600 surveys. One of them we have to discard them because like one of you mentioned about missing information, or they didn't have children, or they didn't live in Washington County. But I think that what I learned from the childcare providers is that they were really intrigued about the RFA. They want to know how they can participate, but they don't understand the rules of the game. And for them, understanding the RFA is quite complex, and also kind of like met the requirements of like developing a budget or like hiring people. So they want to be ready, and they're asking us if we can support like a strategy of helping them to be ready. I think that that was one of the big findings for us.
Great, thank you. That's really
And I
appreciate
think
you sharing.
there's
Go ahead, Adam.
Feedback, yeah.
Yeah, I just want to throw in a couple of the lessons learned, you know, from the increased engagement in the governance work. So again, it was important for us for them to weigh in on the strategies and the actual survey questions. So we had coalitions for the community of color, you know, draft some, and then they went through a session where they really worked through them with the parents. But one of the things we found is the importance of assuming that at each meeting you're going to have a significant number of people who have no background of what's happening, and they got pulled into it, you know, along the way. And so we didn't really anticipate that. We thought, you know, that, oh, this is just a follow-up meeting. We'll do a light touch on kind of the bigger picture, which is complex to step into. And what happened was they requested, and Begonia and our parent leaders were obliged to meet with them on Saturday to actually catch them up to speed on and fill in some of the gaps and answer a lot of the questions that they had that we just didn't have time to do in the meeting. So that was a big lesson. On Sunday. Yeah, but just like
Saturday, it was Sunday, and it was after 6 o'clock. Yeah.
Yeah, it was, you know, after hours to meet them where they are in order for them to really engage authentically in the process. And with that also, you know, we've had to work hard to integrate the translation of meeting materials into our timeline. Because typically we like to send out materials, you know, well in advance for people to review, and you know, that's just made it a little bit more difficult, as well as, you know, sending out you know, emails that needed to be translated, et cetera. So, yeah, so it's been a couple extra layers of work and effort, attention that we've had to invest in ensuring that they're able to fully engage in the process.
Oh, you're responding to my email? Okay. They're responding to Tim. I'm like, whoa, what happened?
Well, thank you both for sharing that. That's quite a bit of work that you've put in on that. Certainly appreciate it. Saw a comment from Dorothy. For those doing focus groups specifically, how are you creating a feedback loop with parents who have provided feedback, specifically sharing what you've learned through phase one and what is happening next in terms of action? It's a great question.
And I'm asking it mostly because it's something that we're struggling with right now. Is we did 11 focus groups across our region and have engaged just over 109 parents, with 50% of those being Hispanic Latinx families. And one of the things that we're grappling with right now is the what next of, like, we've done a lot of really deep engagement, particularly in the focus groups, where parents express a lot of emotion. There's a lot of emotion in these rooms about what they need and what they're not getting. And we want to honor that and make sure that we're following up with them. And this is a continual building of a relationship, not just asking for this information to use for phase one. And so I'm just curious, maybe it's now or at a future meeting, to hear kind of how people are creating that feedback loop with that broader set of parents who they've been engaging, outside of parents who might be on their regional stewardship committee or in a governance body. Hey, Dorothy, this is Beth. One of the things that we're doing is, it's fairly high level. I just want to acknowledge that there is a lot of emotion that comes up in these meetings, and it does feel a little just hard walking away from that, knowing we don't have an solution for them or a way of reaching back out individually to offer empathy or, any personal response. But one of the things that we're doing is keeping people updated in our monthly newsletter that we send out. It's just like, hey, this is what's going on in our process, and here's what we're learning, and here's what the next steps are. And then also on our updating our Lane Kids website, which is our parent-facing website. And then one of the things that we got asked, which was a really nice side effect of having one of our focus groups be with, well, it wasn't really a focus group, it was more like just a conversation that we had at our local Head Start Policy Council, which all the parents go to, was that they invited us back to be like, hey, we want to hear kind of what's going on at the hub level and just be more informed. So that was a nice, just like relationship building moment that wasn't expected. We just wanted to kind of take a half an hour of their meeting to chat with them. So, just trying to be as parent-facing as possible in terms of social media, newsletters, website, and trying to give some kind of response back in terms of what we're hearing and what's next in terms of the expansion planning.
Great, thank you. Cass, do you want to share?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, yeah, Cass has something she wants to add, and then I think in the interest of time, I think we at that point probably need to turn it over to Dana.
Yes. Thank you, everyone, for getting on this call, and I have really thoroughly enjoyed all the creative ways that you guys are working with families and to elevate parent voice. One thing I wanted to update you on is Joan's not here today, otherwise she could speak more eloquently to this, but we're in the process of gathering all of the parent involvement on the stewardship committees and other focus group work that you have going on with parent engagement, and figuring out what the next steps might be on how we continue to engage with those parents and elevate their voice and optimally turn them into parent leaders where they're maybe engaging and leading future groups. So stay tuned for some more information about how we can gather some input from you guys about what might be helpful as outputs to you if we bring these parents together. So thank you for the question earlier. Yeah.
Thank you. This is Anya. Can I ask you something about the review committee? I saw the names, and it seems that the group is quite homogeneous, but I didn't see any parent representation. Is this something that it can be solved, can be fixed, can be expanded?
You're talking about the review process for the phase one
the group
plans?
that is actually reviewing, the group that is reviewing, the work that we do.
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly something we can have some conversation about. I mean, I think that it hasn't been discussed, to my knowledge, as a group that would include external stakeholders, but rather would be an internal staff work group, essentially. But it's certainly something we can follow up on.
We will definitely follow up.
And Begonia, this is Gwen. I think that that's a place where we might be able to include parents is in the RFA review process. We are considering, community members, and we're trying to figure that out right now. So that's in development, the review process. So I'm making a note of that as we're thinking about community stakeholders in that RFA review process, maybe that's when we could reach out and include parents. So that process is still in development, so please don't take this as like as a final, but I really appreciate thinking about that more thoroughly. Yeah.
Definitely. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm just saying this thing because the later that we involve them in the process, the harder that it gets for them to participate in an authentic way.
Absolutely. For anybody, not just parents, for anyone.
All right.
Thank you.
Well, thank you all for sharing. That's a lot of really great work. I think, many of you know, my background is family engagement work, prior to it being early childhood, and, heard so many great things, so many things that we could say are best practices. And, it's really, really awesome to see folks leading that work in really authentic ways around the state. So thank you all for sharing that. And I know that there are other great stories and things of that nature too in other places that we didn't get to hear about. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Dana, who has an update on contract status, which I know you are all anxious to hear about.
Alrighty, good afternoon. This is Dana Yoon here with Preschool Promise. Brett mentioned earlier, this is really hot off the press because it really is. It's probably like 10 minutes before we started this meeting. Just giving you a little bit of an update. So our division, the Early Learning Division, Department of Administrative Service, the Department of Justice, and the Department of Education, we have all been working really hard on trying to go ahead and get contracts out, because the reality is that you guys don't have a contract right now. So what has been agreed upon is that your existing hub contracts will be amended. So that means that we will be extending your current hub contract to go ahead and reflect from October 1st to January the 31st of 2020. We will be adding additional funds to the existing funding streams, and in addition, we'll be adding the new work regarding the ECE sector planning as well. So what happens next is that within the next day or 3 days, maybe 3 days, all of those contracts will be sent out for signature. It's super duper important that you guys return that back to us as soon as possible, because we're trying to go ahead and get everything moved right along. And then priority, because obviously we have a lot of contracts that we need to be sending out. Priority will be given to the hubs that have Preschool Promise, because we understand that some of our Preschool Promise hubs are coming really tight, if not already really tight, on paying providers and getting that money out. But the goal is that everybody, we're all going to be sending your contracts out for signature within the next day to 3 days. There is going to be some more formal communication that's going to be sent out by email. So it's not just Dana saying this in a meeting. So there is going to be an email that's going to go out with more information, more formal information. But I guess in a nutshell, we're going to be reinstating your existing contracts. They're going to be extended to January the 31st. And then just get those back to us so we can get everything going. Okay? Any questions about what I just shared? Okay,
Okay.
there you go.
Any questions, comments, or otherwise for the good of the order before we wrap it up here?
This is Begoña. Did you say something about additional funds as well as the EC expansion?
Correct.
Could you explain the nature of those expanding funds? What listening?
What was the question?
That additional funding for the EC sector planning?
I don't have details on that.
I don't have details.
Yeah,
on
that's
that.
that's a
So
that's a Denise question.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
This is Athena with South Central. So with that, so this is going through January 31st, 2020 or 2021. When will it end?
2020, because we hope that by then we'll have the other new contracts in place and the ratification process will be done. So right now it's just a way for us to go ahead and get funding out to our hubs.
Okay, and we would expect that starting in February we would have a new contract?
That is correct.
This is Krista, and I'm so sorry, but I was at the end. I had to take a comfort break, and I'm the only person listening in. So can you say what you just said again so I can understand the funding? I'm terribly sorry. It was just important.
It's okay. Total. Okay. Let's do this. So anywho, what we're going to be doing is to go ahead and get funding out to our hubs. Is that we're going to be reinstating your original hub contract. So it's going to be extended to January the 31st of 2020. And then additional funding will be added. We are giving priority. We're going to get started with Preschool Promise hubs and then make it down the list, just because some of our Preschool Promise hubs are coming really tight on their funding and their ability to pay providers. So really what you need to take away from this meeting is that keep an eye on your email. There's going to be more formal communication that's going to go out, and then return that contract signed back to us as soon as you receive it, because we're trying to get everything moving.
Okay. If there are no other questions, we'll go ahead and wrap it up there. If there are questions that arise following the call, you guys know where to find us. Don't hesitate to shoot us a call or a quick email. Thank you all very much for your time today. Thanks to those of you that shared about your work, and look forward to hearing your thoughts, feedback, questions on our internal review process. Thanks all, and have a great rest of your day.